Let's see. It's live.
We're live.
And the way we know that is we can look in the room and we see so many wonderful people are here. Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Susan Stiffelman, and
hi, I'm Wendy Behary. Welcome.
We're really happy that you're here. And oh my gosh, we've just had an incredible time preparing this workshop for you. So just by way of a brief introduction, I'm Susan Stiffelman. I'm sort of hosting this with Wendy, and I'm the author of Parenting Without Power Struggles and Parenting with Presence. And I've been doing a lot of online events. I find it's an easy way to work with parents around the world. It's affordable. They don't need a sitter. They don't need to travel. They don't need the hotel. And we're reaching parents with so much great support. Most recently, I did a workshop, or a 4-day series actually, on co-parenting without power struggles. And one of my guests was Wendy Behary. Say hi, Wendy, again.
Hi again. And it was a pleasure to be with you on that show as well.
Yeah, so I invited Wendy because so many people said my co-parent or former parent, or whatever the configuration in current day, is so difficult, is oppositional, is resistant, is demeaning, is aggressive, is bullying. What do I do? And so Wendy is just a fantastic resource on narcissism. And when I reviewed what had happened after that 4-day series, I thought, well, for sure, I want to do something with Wendy. So here we are, and we'd love to know who's here with us, just so we know you can hear us. Hi, Joan. Glad you're here.
Hi, Joan.
We're starting to get some people. So I'm gonna turn this over to Wendy in a moment, just to kind of give us the overview of what we call narcissism, or narcissistic personality disorder. And of course, it's a spectrum. Some of you are dealing with people who are mildly have those characteristics in a fairly mild way. Others, it's quite extreme. But I want to give you the lay of the land in terms of how we're going to go. Oh my gosh! And then
look at all the names coming in.
No, it's such a
wonderful.
So basically, after you sign in, and we understand there's a lag, audio lag. So we may say something and invite you to type something in the chat box, and then you may not actually hear it for another 30 seconds. So we'll also put those things in the chat. But for those of you watching the replay later, this might explain to you why sometimes it seems like things are slightly out of sync. Even my mouth sometimes. We rely on technology, and it does it well, good enough job. It's sort of like parenting. If you can be a good enough parent, it's okay. But you have in your chat box over here, those of you who are attending in person, you can type in that box and then click on the little balloon to the left if you have a question. We know you have lots of questions. So it will probably make this flow better if you listen for a while, and then we'll allocate time toward the end to see what is left unsaid or hasn't been addressed. And of course, this is a 2-part class. So what we're doing is we're building on a foundation today, and we will be addressing more nuts and bolts next week. And again, if you can't attend live, it's fine. You can catch the replay. Please let your friends know the enrollment is still wide open, and people can join as late as next week and still take part next week, or just get the recordings. So let's see who we have. Why don't you greet some of the people, Wendy, and then I'll take it.
I'm reading. It's exciting, and from all over. Just like our bi-coastal experience here in conducting this webinar, I'm seeing Megan in California as well as Susan in New Jersey. And
hey, I just realized, you know what? Excuse me. Maybe we don't want to say exactly where they're from, because some people are quite private about being part of the series.
That's true. That's right.
And we
do want to guarantee as much as we possibly can with technology the privacy that everyone would prefer. But hello to all of you: Carla, Paula, Jennifer, Lori, Merle, Colleen, Crystal, Carrie. Gosh, it's wonderful. Even Steve. Okay. Steve, we have a man as well. Welcome.
Great. So what we'll start with is just giving you an overview of a very complex issue, and that is narcissistic personality disorder. And in our vernacular, we often just call people narcissists or they're narcissistic. So Wendy, what I'd like you to do is sort of give us the overview of this personality disorder, but then also trimming it down so that it doesn't always show up to the extreme that you're going to initially describe.
Okay. Yeah, let me start first, Susan. Thank you for having me. And I'm so excited to be in this discussion with you today on this really relevant and important topic. It's been great fun getting to know you recently, and it just felt like, I think we said it before, it felt for me like kismet, the way we met. And I'm so in awe of your work and so inspired by your contributions. And so I'm really excited to do this with you today, and real happy to be with the people who are listening in. So I'm the author of Disarming the Narcissist. I am practicing here in New Jersey, teaching therapists how to work with narcissism, helping parents who are dealing with issues of narcissism, and helping couples or individuals who are partnered with someone who has narcissism in their personality. And what that means is, just briefly, that you're dealing with someone who is highly self-absorbed. Narcissism itself happens along a spectrum. So you think in terms of the more benign types of narcissism to the more extreme versions of that in narcissistic personality disorder, where you're likely to find forms of more aggressive behavior and what we sometimes think of as more malignant narcissism, tougher to bend, less flexible when it comes to change, and really meets more of the absolute criteria that I've listed in my book and certainly is available in a lot of literature. But it does happen along a spectrum. So you're thinking of someone who's highly self-absorbed, entitled, demanding, demeaning, devaluing, as Susan said, can be very bullying, arrogant, pushy, my way or the highway, non-reciprocal, non-empathic, not accountable for their actions, not appreciative of the impact that their behaviors, their words, their gestures have on another. And we are aware and concerned about that impact on children, on the impact on the non-narcissistic partner, on the offended party, as I sometimes call them, and how they have such a burden in trying to manage the impact of the narcissist on their mutual children. And that's really what we want to get into today, is understanding this syndrome or phenomenon, if you will, of narcissism, which is being talked about all over the place these days. And then more specifically, how to understand it in the context of a relationship and a family, and the effects that it can have on children and on a parenting relationship, and try to help you to become more capable and confident and sturdy in your own skin when dealing with a parenting partner, whether you're living with them, you're leaving them, or you've already left them, but how to deal with them as effectively as possible vis-a-vis your children.
That's a great intro, and I was just grabbing your book, Wendy, Disarming the Narcissist, because I want to be able to comfort the parents who are listening. I know that for many of you, there's a sense of urgency. Just tell me, what do I say? How can I get through to my narcissistic partner? And we are definitely going to get into the nuts and bolts. We're going to build it up to that. But one of the things I love about Wendy's work, and it's quite unusual, is that she doesn't give up on the narcissistic person. Now, in some cases, you will absolutely block contact for you, for your child. We're not really talking so much about that right now. If there's abuse, then we take that into the category of abuse.
Yes.
Right, Wendy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it needs to be said for those of you, if you have friends or you yourself are dealing with someone who is abusive and also happens to be narcissistic, because not all narcissists are abusive. not in that aggressive, dangerous way where safety is being compromised. But if there's abuse, as Susan said, we deal with this as abuse, and that becomes a matter of safety first, and perhaps in most cases a legal issue for legal intervention and protection by the law whenever possible. So we're going to be talking about, the kind of icky, sticky tangles that we can get into with narcissists that are frustrating, difficult, and harmful emotionally, psychologically to the welfare of our children, even if they're not physically violent in that relationship.
Okay, great. So what we're going to be getting into, and I'm just looking for the page because I wanted to refer to it in a little bit, is how you can, by understanding, and this is why we're going to start with the understanding, and then mindful awareness, so that you're present in your own skin, either when the narcissistic partner does something quite triggering for you that might derail your ability to respond effectively, but also so that you can be present for your kids. So if you're either privy to seeing that other parent demean, bully, disconnect your child, you want to be able to respond to that in a helpful way without inflaming the situation. Or if your child later reports something to you, that we don't want the child to become the tattler or the messenger between the two of you, but we do want to hold this place that I talk about in my work as the captain of the ship. Wendy, can I just sort of run that, that scenario for a second?
Oh yeah, please do.
Okay. And then if you have your book, Wendy, I really want us to be able to review those 5 strategies that you're. So so basically in my work, this is the parent. The right hand represents the parent. The left represents the child. I know some of you are quite familiar with my work. You've been in my tribe for a long time. Others are new. Welcome. The parent, in this scenario where the right hand is above the left, the parent is above the child's. Doesn't mean you're better or more worthy of respect or any of that. It means you're in charge, not in control, in charge. And I call this the captain of the ship. And in both my books and all my classes, everything I teach is about helping parents be this captain of the ship, because children need to know that there's a loving, confident grown-up in charge. It's a tremendous relief for kids when they feel the presence, smell the aroma of a captain. That means if they're, the seas of their life get stormy or rocky, they can turn to you. Now, when you move here, I call this the 2 lawyers. This is where you're arguing with your kids. The child here might say, I'd really like to have brownies for breakfast. And you say, well, sweetheart, I'm afraid not. Why not? Because brownies aren't healthy. They have too much sugar. You won't. But grandma gives me brownies and she says they're really good for you. You can get into an argument. So this is lawyer mode. Lots of parents live here. Or it can get even worse. The child is now calling the shots. Well, if you don't let me have brownies, I'm not going to even eat anything else. Oh, yes, you are, young man. Otherwise, straight to your room, or no sleepover for you this weekend, whatever. Because down here is where you're feeling desperate, needy, and out of control. And I call this the dictator. The dictator has no authentic power. The dictator actually rules by fear and intimidation. They wipe out bank accounts. They throw people in jail. When you're feeling desperate and out of control and you're in dictator mode, it's very unsettling for a child. And sometimes people with narcissistic wounding parent from, well, other people do as well. Just because you do this doesn't mean you're a narcissist. But they tend to stay in lawyer or particularly dictator mode, where there's a lot of praise or blame or shaming, because the narcissist is in this dictator place because they just feel they need the child to behave a particular way to make them feel better or look good. So what my work is all about, and where this fits so beautifully with Wendy's work, is that when you're the captain of the ship, you're calm, you're capable of handling the storm. Even if your child has had a very difficult or painful encounter with their narcissistic parent, you want them to turn to you. And you want your response to your child to be one where you're present, you're available to help them through it. And this is how we mitigate or lessen the impact of the other parent's behavior. Does that make sense to you, Wendy?
Yeah, it really does. It's a beautiful paradigm, actually, for talking about this. I'm thinking on so many levels as I'm listening to you about that, staying in that position, which you and I have discussed. It's a place of captain, which means a place of sturdiness, not dictator, not authoritarian, but a sturdy, capable, competent, very clear-minded and healthy adult. And in the model that I practice with narcissism, we just call that the healthy, wise adult, right? In parenting, I like the metaphor of the captain of the ship, right? There's a lot of responsibility, but there's also a kind of, harnessing, embracing those that you are responsible for with great care. And so I love that model. I love that idea. But I was also thinking on the dimension that when we're not in our sturdy self, when we're not fortified by that sense of captain, as a mode, then it might be, and I think we'll get into talking about this a little bit, it might be because we've gotten drawn into other experiences in our life. We're triggered. Our buttons are pushed. Some things happen. The narcissists are the most notorious people on the planet to push your most sensitive buttons. And even though you may be married to one for years, there's this amazing capacity that they have under certain conditions to activate the most sensitive buttons. And so you drop from that position of captain in your parenting role or partner in your relationship to almost a childlike position of vulnerability, where you may find yourself responding in ways that you did under earlier conditions in your life. You're giving into the narcissist. You're feeling it's hopeless. You're helpless. You're fighting back by defending yourself when there's really nothing to defend because you haven't done anything wrong.
Right.
You're giving into the demands. You're stifling your own needs and preferences, your own ideas and values when it comes to protecting your children. And not because you're a bad parent, but because you're stuck in some other time warped place.
So that's where I want to start then, is that all of this work is going to be about helping you be this captain, not only so you aren't triggered, but so you could show up effectively with the co-parent or with the child. And the first step is going to be what we're moving into now, understanding what narcissism is and its origins. Because if you can step away, one of the reasons we get so triggered by the narcissist behavior, and you guys can comment in the chat box if this is making sense to you, is that we take it personally. It's not personal. It's not about you. Regardless of how convincing that narcissist is, I'm only yelling because you forgot again to do this, or you're always this, or you're never that. It's not about you. And so Wendy's going to move into a beautiful explanation of the origins of narcissism so that you can step into a less personalized relationship with their behavior and also perhaps more empathy. I know for me, with a narcissist in my life, I just feel tremendous empathy and compassion. We're not asking you to go there today, but it's a possibility, and it certainly frees you up to respond in a different way. So from understanding the origin, then we're going to talk briefly about being present and mindful, and then we want to move into some of the strategies. So take it away, Wendy. Let's hear more about the onset of narcissism.
Okay, that's great. That's a nice intro to this. And you mentioned the word empathy. So let me start with that. The reason we want to understand narcissism, and let's think of the word understanding as the equivalent of empathy. Because empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is not compassion. You may feel all three: sympathy, compassion, empathy. But I'm asking that we just try and tune in empathically, meaning let's get the clearest, most vibrant, visceral understanding of narcissism, like you could feel it in your bones. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by understanding the story. It's like watching a movie. If we were watching this in movie form and we were developing the character from childhood through adulthood, we would all feel a kind of, even as Susan says, compassion for the suffering child. We'd feel a sadness, perhaps, an upset, a worry for this child who's not getting what they need in the way they need it. And then as they become an adult and we watch the way they're treating their partners, we may feel angry and frustrated and annoyed. We've forgotten about the child underneath, and we see this larger than life character who suddenly shows up on the screen being very demanding and very insulting and disrespectful and really hurtful to their family, even though that may not be their intention. So I want to see if we can widen our frame and develop the sense of empathy, not to let them off the hook, not to make excuses for narcissists. I have no interest in doing that. In fact, the irony is the more you understand, as Susan mentioned, the less personal it becomes. So you're free to not go into that self-blame, self-doubt place. You're free to look at it very clearly and get it. And you're free to even engage in ways that may be more effective in confrontation and setting limits. And again, most importantly, in protecting your children. So let's look at the story. Well, underneath all the bluster and the noise and the sometimes charming, showing off, arrogant, demanding, controlling types of behaviors, you have very often, from what we see in the world of mental health, a little one who comes to the world like any other little baby is born into the world, possibly with a temperament that may be a bit more susceptible to developing this kind of personality, but so much depends on the environment that the little one meets, be it their siblings, their parents, their caretakers, their teachers, the children at school. And if that child, let's say, is perhaps very sensitive, which I tend to think narcissists are at the core, if they're very sensitive, then the capacity to become very insecure is high. Right? A sensitivity to feeling dismissed or rejected or unwanted or undesirable or not good enough, not perfect enough, can set up this premise for being insecure, for feeling actually not good about yourself. If that also happens to come with, in the package, a dad or a mom or a caretaker who spends a lot of time demanding performance be excellent, demanding extraordinary show of self, the prodigal child, the child prodigy, the special one, the apple of my eye. Throw that into the mix, and you have a child who is sensitive and perhaps even more needy of emotional attention and unconditional love, paired with an environment, again, doesn't necessarily have to be parents, and this isn't about bad-mouthing parents, it's just about understanding that the fit isn't necessarily really good. But you have then a child who doesn't get what they need in the way of just pure treasured feeling of being lovable just for your little self, without having to prove yourself or do anything but just be your little self. And instead they have, an environment that's asking them to be extraordinary in order to matter, that your work is your worth, that the way you show up is the way you have value. And so what gets discarded along the way, because it has to for survival purposes, is the power and the value of connection. Really connecting with someone intimately in a loving and affectionate and, caring and reciprocal way, with an ability to attach to another person's experience on the inside because they're so disconnected from their own experience on the inside. And so they meet you as adults, and here you've met this person who can be incredibly charming, really amazing in the courtship phase, because narcissists are very good at trying to get what they want, and they get what they want, right? So when you think, well, how come I had this really warm and soft and caring and delightfully flirtatious individual once upon a time? Where the hell did he or she go, right? Well, they're good at doing what they have to do to get what they want. They also can have, they have heart. There's realness in there from time to time. You'll see that vulnerable side, but it doesn't stick around very long because the demands of being, powerful and righteous and entitled and, super special and competitive, more and something different, something shiny and new. And their children being kind of these little versions of themselves, little replicates that make them look incredibly wonderful and special. That becomes imperative, in their grown-up life to sort of keep this cycle going. And yet, underneath, they're suffering. They're lonely. They're lonely, they're insecure, and they don't feel really good about who they are, and they don't even know that. That's the dilemma.
Wendy, I'm going to pause you there, and let's just hear how people are doing. Anyone want to share how this fits with your experience? I really love what you said just now. I mean, I love all of it. It sounds awful, but I'm so thrilled in a way. As sad as it is, what you're sharing, and as someone who feels so much love for children that informs all my work, it is kind of heartbreaking when you take that narcissist in your life and you roll the camera back and you see them as a 3-month-old or a 2-year-old, longing for authentic attunement and connection, and compensating for its absence by hardening and developing that disconnected way of moving through life. So we're getting some comments. We won't say anyone's names, but do you want to read some of them?
Yeah, I'm reading them as they're coming up. My kids are getting sick of the constant competition. This is exactly my experience. I'm proud to say that over the last 3 years, I went deeply into my own mindfulness practice and empathy for my partner. It's definitely softened our family experience.
Here's one. I spent years learning this, but get it now. Here you confirm it is golden.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, the power of empathy. Again, remember, it's not for those of you who may be feeling upset by this, because that does happen. Certainly, the misunderstanding is usually that it's a way of letting the narcissist off the hook, and we're just making excuses so we can feel sorry for them and then be their caretakers.
Right.
And by no means is that the case. Although I will say this, excuse me, if your intention is to stay in relationship with them and you want to become perhaps more skillful at seeing what impact or influence you can have in inspiring them to reconsider some of their behaviors, it's helpful to engage in, and we'll get into this more perhaps next week when we get into the nuts and bolts, as Susan said, but to engage in the thing that I call empathic confrontation.
Yeah.
So just really simple sneak peek would be like this. I know, look, I know, honey, that you grew up in a family where the only thing that mattered in your life was achievement, getting into the Ivy League school and being number one in your class. I know that was important. I know your parents were immigrants. This is all they knew was, you have to have a better life. And so all the emphasis was on doing, and performing. All right, there's your empathy, because that's, I know, I get it, I see it, I feel it, I understand it, I've got your story in front of me. There's a beauty in that because you garner attention and you eliminate distraction. So it pulls the narcissist a little bit closer. So I get it, but here comes the confrontation. But, it's stressing the kids out. Your kids love you and they need more than that. And your parents, while they had good intentions, they didn't really prepare you to live in the world of relationships, even though they prepared you to be a top performer at work.
Yeah.
Right. So these are therapeutic statements that I would make in the treatment room, and they're the same ones that I coach my clients to make in their relationships as well.
And we will get into this more. I know lots of you are now asking, how do I do it? How do I keep my kids okay? So we want you to engage, and we want you to be part of the conversation. And we're going to captain this ship for you guys. That's the best way I can put it. And we know that there are some precursors. There are some things we need to lay out for you, starting with what Wendy's been starting to do now, is to help you understand the origin of narcissism and the layers that the narcissist builds as a protective mechanism from the pain of disappointed connection, or the very strong message, and I don't know if you want to reiterate this, but that you should not have needs. So
yeah, that's a great point. There is this usually in the origins of narcissism, and I should probably go back for just 1 minute to that, because in addition to what I just described as one story that depicts the evolution of a narcissist, there's also the story that some of you may know called, the child who was just super indulged. There is that child too.
To that one.
It's a pure narcissism. And I hate to say this, but usually that's the one where I become hopeless myself, because it's so, not only do they get the conditional love, they get everything, and their dependence issues become so great because the whole world around them has taken care of them in ways that has not allowed them to learn how to grow. So they feel entitled to have everyone sort of do for them. Now that's a component in almost all narcissists, but it's super high in those that have just been purely spoiled and entitled. And those that might have monkey see, monkey do types of behaviors because they grew up with a narcissistic parent as their gender role model and they're mimicking what they know.
Yeah.
But the one thing I think maybe, Susan, you were alluding to here that's really critical for, and we should start right out of the gate with this, is you've got to ask yourself a critical question when you're dealing with a narcissist in your life. What kind of leverage do you have? Now, leverage can sound like a really dirty word, but it's a really important word when dealing with narcissists, because if you don't have leverage, meaning meaningful consequences, something the narcissist doesn't want to face, doesn't want to have happen to them, losing their access to their children, having their children feel badly towards them, not talk to them as they grow towards adulthood. Maybe they don't want to lose you in their life. There may be something there that's meaningful enough to them that it gives you a little leverage, not to put forth threats, but to really put forth truths about what is likely to happen, what's inevitably going to happen if change doesn't happen. Incentives don't work with narcissists because they're so good at getting what they want anyway. So when you dangle the carrot, they're not all that enticed. But leverage does, something that produces a little fear and a bit of a doubt or a compromise to their very comfy world as they've designed it.
So I want to clarify that because many people will think leverage is a threat.
Yeah.
And can you sort of go deeper with that? Can you explain what that would sound like?
Yeah. And it's really important that it not be used as a threat. Because, the problem is that if you make an empty threat, as many of us will do when we're angry, I've had it, that's it, I'm done with this,
Yeah.
And we're not really there yet, but we're angry and we're frustrated and we just want to put something out there that might have a little power. It doesn't work well with narcissists. First of all, they'll toss a bigger threat right back at you. Like, well, you'll see what's going to happen to you in court, and we'll see what's going to happen with custody or support or money or your house. So they become retaliatory. They're competitive, and they like games and they like winning games. So better that you might use something like this if it's true for you. If you're not quite ready, or you're on your way out, or you're already out of the relationship, any of those would still have leveraging opportunities, meaning you can say things like, it makes me sad because I would like to think that at the very least we could be parenting partners, maybe even parenting friends, in that I think it's important to both of us that our children grow up to be healthy, good people and functioning good people. I think we both want that. And sadly, I don't see a path for us ahead with the way things are going. I kind of suspect that, at least for myself, that inevitably this is going to come apart. That's if you're still together, or we're going to end up tangled up in legal matters forevermore, which will be expensive and uncomfortable for both of us, given, the fact that your reputation is important to you, and it's going to harm the kids. In the end, it will just hurt them. So that's the kind of thing that you might say as a prediction. So you can use leverage as a way of predicting the future, as a way of forecasting what's likely to happen without saying, I'm done, that's it, it's over. Now you can say, I'm done, that's it, it's over, if you're really done. If you're really done, you can say, look, I'm done. I'm right at the edge here. So we've got to get help. And if we don't get help, then we're done, So if you're really there, then you might need to say that, because that might be the page turner. That might be the thing that actually gives you an opportunity to see if the narcissist will engage in getting help and making some changes. And most importantly, as a parent for your children.
And we know that narcissists in general, because there's there's an inner void and a very high, very strong lack of self-reflection are not people who typically walk into a therapist's office for help. So when you talk about getting help, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, I've begged, I've pleaded, I've asked, I've threatened, my husband, my wife won't go for help.
Yes.
So there are situations, however, and Wendy's one of the rare therapists who specializes in that population, where either because of depression, anxiety, the potential loss of a marriage or access to children, or an employer who requires or demands that a narcissistic individual who keeps creating problems in the workplace, am I right, Wendy, that in those situations, someone may actually come in?
Yeah, it's almost always involuntary, except in those cases where there may be a depressive episode, or they're in a crisis and they're panicked or they're anxious and they want to get rid of it, but they want a quick fix. They don't usually want to sit down and really talk to you as a therapist. But certainly a partner where it's meaningful to them. The narcissist doesn't want to lose the marriage. That might be the thing. That's part of it. So that's step one. The other way they come into therapy is I'll sit with a partner of the narcissist, and I'll ask them to go home, or I'll ask them for permission to maybe audio tape, make an audio recording for them to bring home to their narcissistic partner, that I invite the narcissist, please come in and be a reporter. Please tell me your side of the story, because I'm only getting one side. And they are so happy to come in and just badmouth their partners, but at least I get their foot in the door. So it's a little sneaky, but it is a way to bring them in the door. So that's part one. But part two means you have to be sure, as a consumer of services in psychotherapy, that you're selecting a therapist who really understands this complicated personality and has an approach for working with them.
You know, this is so important. And circling back to what some of the comments I've been reading, some people think, how did I fall for this guy or this woman? And they were so charming and so persuasive and so warm, and, you know, anticipated my needs and took me here and charmed, wined and dined me. And narcissists can be very difficult for a therapist to spot. So I'm glad that you mentioned it needs to be a very experienced therapist. They're charming, they're intelligent, they're often very successful in their career. They may have a circle of devoted friends. They can be engaging and funny and, stimulating company. So they are not easy to spot even for a therapist, let alone, an average person who falls for them. So Wendy, you've talked a lot so far about some of the origins, that this early childhood wound can set this behavior patterns in motion. I want to touch on the mindful piece, because going back to my analogy as the captain of the ship.
Yes.
When the ship captain gets news that there's a leak in the ship or the engine is spewing smoke, we don't want to see the captain leaping over the side of the ship. We want to see the captain, okay, what do we have to do? And in the same regard, in my work, a lot of my work, and particularly with Parenting with Presence, but in my workshops and classes online, it's all about first managing our reactivity to our children, and in this scenario, to our co-parent. And I teach a lot of different pieces to that, but one of them has to do with being present. So if you are married to or divorced from a narcissist, there's a fairly good chance that their behavior has been a match, at least for who you once were. People who tend to be pulled into narcissist orbit routinely, and maybe you can speak to this, there are a set of characteristics or their own, you call them schemas, that make that a fit. And so mindfulness, being present, noticing what's going on in your mind, and my heart's racing, I'm feeling attacked. This is a familiar feeling. I remember feeling this as a child, or I remember feeling this with my boss, this feeling of not having a voice. My stomach is shaky. I want to run. I wish I could drink something or smoke something. The more you can be present and make room for whatever reactions are coming up for you that might be reactivated from early childhood for yourself, the more you can be that calm captain in the present moment, not reacting to that narcissist attack, but responding with calm, because you're not replaying some old wound. You're being present and kindly toward that. Oh, there's that feeling of anxiety and intimidation that's so familiar to me from growing up with such an overpowering parent. Okay, let me just settle myself down so that in the moment you can show up differently. Can you touch on that or expand on that?
I love the way you just introduced that, and it's such an incredibly important aspect. I'm hearing feedback on my voice here for some reason, but let me see if I can just back up a little. There we go. It's such an important aspect. Let's see if I can put it like this. We're all at the mercy of our memory all day long, all the time, right? We're remembering when we're speaking, we're remembering together. There's some reference for the feelings that we feel in our bodies, the chills that we get, the smell of something, the sound of something. So there are an infinite number of sensory conditions where we can get triggered. The narcissist can push a lot of buttons. And I remember early in my years of working in the field, and some of the first narcissists I encountered, I write about this in my book, I didn't know what to call them, but all I knew was myself was suddenly dropping into this place of reaction that was kind of familiar to me, but I hadn't seen it in a really long time. So here I am. Somebody was writing questions about mediation, actually. Can you do this in mediation? I was a young intern working in mediation, and I had a narcissistic guy come in to the mediation. They were working on child custody and visitation issues. And he was so mean and critical and insulting towards me. And I remember apologizing when I didn't do anything wrong. I remember feeling like I was just going to give in to whatever he wanted. And I had this sort of what we call like almost a metacognition, like another part of me standing outside over here going, Wendy, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You know, why are you giving in? What are you apologizing for? So there was enough awareness at the moment, but not enough where I was able to supersede it, where I was able to overcome it. So I failed miserably in that situation and felt really amazed at the power of that trigger, what we call schema. So I had this old schema inside me that says, you know, give in or else, sacrifice yourself or you're going to be feeling guilty, just stay out of harm's way. And I felt like literally like a little 5 or 6 year old, which has a story attached to it. So I could feel that little me in there reacting. And many of us, when we think about our experiences with the narcissist that we're dealing with, can feel our little me at that moment. If you really tune in, as Susan's saying, breathe into that, feel that, sense that, see that, look for that little, video clip and find that little you. If you can't, get a picture of yourself, find a photograph of your little face. And remember, there's a story attached to those reactions, because why would I give in? Why would I start apologizing for something that's not my fault? Why would I in fact, compromise or surrender myself to someone when in fact, as a therapist, for example, that's not going to help the client either. This does not help the narcissist to give in. I'm just colluding with what's already a really bad habit in their life of just getting what they want when they want it. Mm-hmm. And I'm giving up my rights. And I'm not a good model for my child when I'm doing that. So there's a whole lot of not good things happening. And yet I know it's not my fault. I know it's my memory that's gotten in the way. But if I'm mindfully aware of that, then there might be that magical little 30-second chance to just catch my breath, say nothing, see my little self over here, take a little look at little me over there and go, it's okay, I got it. I'll take care of it. You don't have to do this anymore because you've got me, and I'm a grown up, and I'm an adult, and I'm smart enough, and I may not really know exactly what to do yet with this narcissistic other, but I have a voice, and I don't have to be angry. I just need to be sturdy. I just need to be solid. I just need to be me. So we can't do that, though, if you're coming from the position of a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old. So that mindfulness, that paying attention, anticipating the glitches that might happen, we know what they are. We know where they come from. We know some of those bad days. We don't know everything because sometimes they come out of the blue. But we know a lot of those patterns. And when we anticipate them and we take our more vulnerable self and put them into a protective space, then there's room for our healthy adult self to be present, to say what's so, to use empathy and confrontation, to set a limit when necessary, to engage a collaborative conversation with flexibility.
And there's a piece there that I want to touch on that we want to fold into this, I think. And that is that in my work, I talk about this thing called snapshot child syndrome. But I use it in other scenarios as well. Meaning, let's imagine that you're holding a snapshot of your child, and in your snapshot, which is the idealized child, you say to your child, it's time to start your homework, and your snapshot child says, sure, Mom, thanks for reminding me. Right?
Yeah.
And your snapshot child, when you say it's time to take out the trash or go to bed, they say, gosh, I'm so glad that you're there, Mom, to make sure the house is nice and clean or help me get enough rest. And we get triggered not because of what our real life child actually does, but because of the mismatch between that real life child and the snapshot child, the idealized child. So my classes are about throwing away the snapshot. And in this situation, it's very similar. But my husband said he wanted to have kids, said he couldn't wait to be a father, said that he would go to all their soccer games, said that I should, whatever it was. And part of what makes it difficult for us to do what we're talking about, being more present, not reacting from the 7-year-old version of ourselves, is that we have to grieve. We have to grieve and throw the snapshot away and come to terms with who our co-parent is, not who we wish they were. And only when we make peace and come to terms with the reality of our situation can we most effectively deal with it.
That's really nicely said, Susan. That's really beautifully articulated. These idealized, there's wisdom in the idealization that sometimes lies in our longings, our deepest longings. So if you're someone who, really fell in love with this person who made promises that really matched the kind of longing that you yourself may have had in your once upon a time. If you grew up yourself feeling emotionally deprived and you meet someone who seems to be so emotionally, on your team and so emotionally generous, at least at the start, they're saying all the right things. They're showing up in the ways that you need. Or, they're incredibly smart, and therefore there's a sense of security. If you've never had that in your life, that sense of stability or security, narcissists can be very ambitious people who will create that kind of security, but that's about it. So there's trade-offs that we make. And I think the grieving of those idealized versions, as you put it, is really important and really hard to do.
But this is what informs us. We come at somebody, and this is another, I keep folding in these pieces of my work, but if we come at someone, I often do talks around, I do lots of live presentations, and I'll bring someone up from the audience and I'll have them put their hands against mine. So they're facing me. I'll do it this way. Imagine that your hands are against mine and I begin to push against you. People push back. They push back in Africa, in Israel, in Kansas, in wherever I've been. I was just at Google last week. People push back. Because it's an instinct to push against that which pushes against us. Now, with a narcissist who's already in this dictator kind of way of living life, disconnected, feeling wounded, not wanting to be vulnerable. When you come at the narcissist with any criticism, shaming, blaming, you need to do this, you're going to unleash the fury of their force, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so this takes us back to that idea that the more we know, the more empowered we become to be able to handle this effectively. So if I know that any step I take to try to push, in a way that is aggressive or angry or demanding, I'm going to get a pushback. But if I also know, because why do narcissists do that to begin with? Why do they do that? Beyond the human factor, the narcissist also lives in a world that's very just two-dimensional. You're either great or you're nothing, right? You're right or you're very, very wrong. You're extraordinarily wonderful or you're just really bad and flawed and defective. So there's nothing in between. And when you know that, the more you know, then again, the more power you bring into your presence with the narcissist. You can say things like, this isn't meant to say you're a bad guy. I'm not calling you a bad person. I'm saying that, what you said right now was hurtful. I want to be helpful to you. My intention is not to be critical of you. My intention is to be helpful, because they're always suspicious of people's motives. They think everyone is out to get them. They think people are just generally going to use you and manipulate you. And they can even come across as sometimes looking paranoid, but they're just so suspicious because they themselves have often been used as little surrogates in their earlier lives. And so they're highly suspicious. So when we know that, we can say things like, this is not meant, to take advantage of you. This is meant to help you. I know you want to be the best parent you can be. Look, Joe, I know you want to be a good father to your child. And this is meant to be helpful, to help you to succeed along that path. I want to be your partner in that effort, right? So it's really stating your intentions, but even more importantly, stating what it isn't. Right.
That's really great. Gosh, I'm so glad that you clarified that. And it's sort of, as you listen, if you weren't in a relationship right now or struggling, as so many of our guests are, it is so heartbreaking, and I think one of the reasons I really wanted to do this and want to do more of these kinds of events is that we have a chance to inoculate the children in these families so that they don't carry forward into their own adult lives that wound.
Yeah.
So we'll take I want to look at a couple of the comments in a moment. This idea, though, I love the overlap here with you, Wendy, because I talk about avoiding this process of coming at our kids or our co-parent, rather to come alongside them. I have this little motion coming alongside. And what you're describing is exactly that. It's coming alongside. This isn't meant to hurt you. I know that you might think that I'm just saying this to be critical. I know that you're trying and that you really want to connect with the boys. And may I give you some, well-intentioned feedback from something that I think would really make things go easier. Whatever it is, there's lots of ways to language it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to language it, exactly. And as I'm peeking over at the comments, there's a lot of activity going on in the chat side. And I'm looking at these really amazing comments and some really tough ones. I can see some people are really struggling. But the question about inoculating our children, so that's, I think I'd like to speak to that for just a moment.
Right.
I know most of you listening, you have children and you're up against a narcissistic parenting partner and you want to protect your children. And there's this idea, I call it the myth, actually, that you should never talk to your children about the other parent in anything but, neutral or supportive ways. And I think that's a disservice to our children. Now, I'm not endorsing the idea of bad-mouthing another parent. What I am suggesting is that we try to find a way to deliver the truth in an age-appropriate, language-appropriate style for our children, because we want to spare them the scar tissue of becoming the little one who feels what you may have been feeling until you became enlightened, right? They feel at fault. Children will start thinking about magical ways that they can fix daddy or mommy and make them nicer. They think about their own sense of self and their worth, and I could be smarter, I could be nicer, I could be quiet, I could be funnier, I could be more skinny, I could be something, and then daddy will like me more and he'll be less mad at me. He'll talk to me. He'll stop going in that little quiet room where he just ignores me. He'll come home more often. Children will go into that place, and we want to really unburden them from feeling like they can do anything about this, because they can't, and it's not their responsibility. We have to tell them that. We have to tell our children, when they say things like, well, you told me I can't interrupt, but daddy interrupts all the time. And he uses those bad words.
Yeah.
And it's all right to say to your child, yeah, well, that's a problem that daddy has. He's, he may mean well, he may love you, he may be doing the best he can, but frankly, it's not okay that he does that. It's really not okay that he does that.
Yes.
Right? So it's really sort of taking a stand on maintaining the values and helping the child to see, the difference between what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's hurtful to others, and also empowering them to know right from the get-go, there is nothing you can do because you're fine as you are. And the truth is, your mom or your dad is missing out on all this fineness and this wonderfulness that is you. And you're really okay just as you are. I know it makes you very sad that, dad doesn't come home as often as you'd like. But that's not about you. It's just really sad because he's missing out on a really terrific kid.
Yes. I'm just
taking... And as they get older, of course, there is other language. So those of you who are, dealing with older children who may have become privy to this word narcissism. I had a 15-year-old who came to meet me with his mom, who's, pretty bright kid, and started reading about narcissism and said, my God, that's my father. That explains it. And I felt, the best way to really alleviate his pain and distress and emancipate him from the responsibility was to confirm it, to say, yeah, it sounds like, I haven't met your dad, but it sounds like from what you're saying, you may be spot on. This may be a problem that your dad has to figure out how to fix. This is not about you.
Yeah. So we are very aware that lots of you have big questions. And I'm going to touch on a couple of things. And I also want to acknowledge how deep and wide the need for support and guidance and information is. This is a 2-part series. It's certainly not years of therapy. Mm-hmm. We have a couple of people. Wendy, are you aware of any online or in-person support groups specific to this, and or ways to find an experienced therapist for those who are asking?
Yeah, well, it depends on where they're located. I do have contacts around the country, not everywhere, unfortunately, but there certainly are a lot of meetups in various states that are free, and they offer support for people who are dealing with narcissistic partners and co-parents. Some states have, stronger, more kind of vigorously involved members than others, but they're worth a look. See,
I would caution people to steer clear of any kind of support group that just is a bashing session where you go there and everyone says horrible things about their partner.
Yeah,
that's not going to be very helpful.
Yeah, I agree, Susan. I think it's not helpful. In fact, it keeps us in that state that I like to think of as kind of intoxicated. We're intoxicated with anger, and while there's comfort and commiseration, it's not very helpful in resolving these issues and moving on and grieving and taking your life forward. So I appreciate that comment. And sometimes the random support groups are just that. They're just places to bash the other and to be hopeless together. And I think that's not always very helpful. In fact, it's never helpful.
Some people are commenting that they've gone to Al-Anon and found that to be...
Yeah. I think Al-Anon can be helpful because it takes into account the idea of the enabler, or what I like to think more often as the self-sacrificing person, the one who forfeits too much of their own needs for the peace and stability of the other. and at a high price, that doesn't necessarily reflect the values that you want to share with your children, and the rights that you have of your own. That being said, I will tell you this: I facilitated a support group for women who were dealing with narcissistic partners for several years, and that group, which was a lovely group of women in tremendous distress, we worked very much on all the ideas that Susan was talking about in terms of developing a mindful awareness of self and an experience, and my inputs about understanding, your own personal narrative and making sense out of your life and understanding narcissism so that you can emancipate yourself. But all of these women, I think, would say to you, and there may be a couple of them listening in today, in fact, I think they would say, don't judge each other too harshly on whether you stay or whether you go. It's not an easy solution. I had a woman who said in the group, if I leave my narcissistic co-parenting husband, I'm leaving my little tiny ones with a man who doesn't really believe that seatbelts are important or that drinking and driving is a problem. And so I lose my supervisory capacity on those days that I don't have custody. And we all like to think that the law will, do the right thing, but the law doesn't always show up exactly the way we need it to. And so sometimes we do forfeit our needs for a period of time until our children are a little older, if possible. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all, but I do think that having support from others and building resources together can be a really beautiful thing.
Good. And there's also codependent. Coda.org is
Yes.
another option for people.
Yep.
So let's talk about, when we did our session together for the Co-Parenting Without Power Struggle Summit, I liked the phrasing that you offered for children, parts of daddy. That's another piece I want to make sure that we talk about for today, how kids can maybe better understand mommy or daddy's narcissistic behavior by not painting them with a big wide brush. Can you kind of reiterate that?
Yeah, it comes right out of the model that I use, which is schema therapy, when I work with narcissists and with partners of narcissists and with children of narcissists, that it's this idea that we all have different aspects of ourself. We have different sides of our personality, or what we call parts or modes, right? So when you're trying to help your children to understand their parent and why all of a sudden they kind of fly off the handle, or they become so detached and inaccessible, or they become so critical and demanding, they can't seem to appreciate the child's playfulness and creativity. The narcissistic parent may find that very silly and foolish because they're triggered, right? Because their own little self underneath is rivaling with their child at present. So
will you repeat that?
Yeah, that very often, because I work with so many narcissistic men, they've taught me a lot about what happens when they are side by side with their child or face to face with their own child in the here and now, who is, maybe acting out, maybe saying things like, I hate this, or I'm tired of this, I don't want to go to sleep, the non-snapshot child. And the narcissistic parent who becomes just completely unbridled by that, they're just beside themselves. And what they'll say is, it's like my kid becomes my rival. And that makes sense to me, because the part of them, that part that's experiencing this little one with all of this freedom to express what they're feeling in the moment, which is completely appropriate for a little child to express.
Yes.
This narcissist never had that freedom to do that when they were little. They couldn't have expressed emotion or cried or been afraid or been upset, because there would have been perhaps a bigger price to pay. So they feel almost this sibling rivalry with their own child. And so that helps at least me, and maybe those of us who are adults, to understand what's happening there. But when we're dealing directly with our children and trying to help them understand, the same language can be really useful to say, your daddy's not a bad person. He's not a bad human. He's got some really good qualities. He has some really good talents. He's, hardworking. And I think he really loves you down deep inside. But there's a part of him sometimes that can be very, very scary or not so nice, mean, or distracted, like not there, almost like he becomes the invisible man. So there's a part of him that sometimes can make us really frustrated. I can see you get really upset, right? Yeah, I get really upset. We're granting permission to the child to feel what's absolutely natural to feel without condemning the whole of the parent. Because it's not the whole of the parent. It's this part of them, of their personality, that is not only damaging, but it's so upsetting for the child to be face to face. So we give them permission to have frustration with this part of their parent.
Really important. And the other thing that it preserves is it allows the child to still have a favorable view of this parent, who in most cases is even biologically 50% of their makeup. So really important. I'm interested to see some of the comments, what you guys are taking away. So if you're having any aha moments or you're finding value in any of this, please feel free to give us feedback, because that will inform how we continue shaping this event. We have another 10 or I don't know, can we go over a bit, maybe 10, 15 minutes, Wendy?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to.
So we've talked, let me just sort of review a few things. We've talked about this idea of being that captain of the ship, so that regardless of what's going on with the other parent, we're better able to show up for in those difficult interactions with our narcissistic co-parent and or with our children in ways that are not reactive, but they're responsive. You've given a beautiful overview of how a narcissist develops those protective mechanisms so that we can perhaps be in a greater place of empathy, not taking it as personally when the storm hits. I read in one book, just such an apt description, that there are certain people, not everyone, but for the narcissist, certain people, maybe people who challenge or confront that person, or who don't give them all the praise or the constant adoration or think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, that they may unleash a fire hose of rage on that person. And many of us know what that feels like. So by contextualizing the behavior, we can not make it about us, not taking it personally. We've talked about ways that we can, and I want to talk a little more about this, but more leverage, applying leverage, and coming more alongside by not kind of painting the person as bad or questioning their motives, or setting up our interaction so that they feel attacked because we know that they'll come out with their guns blazing, but rather acknowledging what's good and that they want to be closer to their kids, or you're hoping that you can have a good co-parenting relationship. I would love to just touch a little bit more on this idea of leverage before we have to wrap up. And then also, I love that we talked about the parts, the narcissistic part of the parent. So, yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, there's also a question up there that I think is important, and it answers another question about support. The parental alienation groups around the country too, some of them, again, be a wise consumer about the content of the group and who's facilitating and what their mission statements are about. But someone asked the question about, could we role play a narcissistic parent that says alienating things to the kids, and how the kids manage that? What do they do with those beliefs? Because narcissists are notorious for the bad mouthing, for trying to alienate the children from the other parent, blaming them, particularly if you are the leaver, if you are the one who has exited the relationships. Narcissists don't usually exit relationships unless they've already lined up someone on the side, because they are lonely underneath. They are lonely little people under all of that stuff that lies on the outer veneer. So they will leave if they have some kind of maybe an entourage or another partner on the side, but otherwise they are being left. And that is an injury, as we say, like no other for narcissists, because let's remember their protective mode, their protective parts include the part that is grandiose and showing off and entitled and strong and fighting and I'll show you, or they're in that mode where they are just busily distracted, excessively involved in their addictions or some other preoccupation or workaholism or pornography or something, right? They have lots of different ways that they distract and self-stimulate, or they're in that kind of, I'll show you, that fight mode or that charming, distracting mode. So, when you call them on it and when you leave them, there's an injury that lies there that leaves them with that sense of, early shame and defectiveness and loneliness. And the only thing they have in their power is to take the kids, right? And to make you the bad guy. So if you've left, you're the bad guy in some cases, not in all cases. And they try to alienate the other parent. And when that happens, what I coach children or parents to help their children with is to say things like, Daddy, I love you, and I don't want you to talk to me about Mom in that way. I think if you have a problem with Mom, you need to talk to Mom. Now, prepare your children. If this is a narcissistic parent who is very angry and prone to volatility, then you may want to only help them to figure out how to anticipate these words and how to leave the room, how to find space, how to nod their head and move away, right? How to always be able to feel free to share with you whatever it is that's happening that might be scary, that might be secretive, that might be upsetting, and to keep that promise that you will protect them no matter what. You'll protect their secrets and you'll help them with it. But sometimes the best coaching is really just to say to the alienating parent, please don't do that. It hurts me and it upsets me.
Well, I would take it further, because that may be their intention, that it hurts you. But I think
I meant from the child.
Oh, this is the child speaking.
This is the child. This is
great. So great. I'm glad that we got to make that distinction. So I love that you're giving words and language to our listeners so that they can actually coach their kids. These are words that you can say to Mommy or Daddy if they say something that hurts your heart, even if they say it about me. Yeah. Daddy, I love Mommy. I know you're mad, but I don't like it when you say those things. And of course, we're going to modify this for the child's developmental age.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And the other question you asked, Susan, was about the leverage. Some people were writing about whether or not mediation is even a good idea with a narcissist. Is it even possible? It might be, because the leverage that you will find when it comes to, mitigating circumstances through the law is in the money. Narcissists don't like to feel like they have to, they often don't want to give their money to a lawyer for long periods of time or in large quantities in order to go through this process. They may want to fight, and they may want to delay, and they may detain, they may be passive aggressive, but they may choose mediation only because they believe that they can be incredibly charming and solicitous and convincing enough to the mediator to swoon everyone and to get what they want in this settlement agreement. So it comes down to, just like with a therapist, to find someone who has some understanding of this complicated thing called narcissism.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's just so much to cover. I'm really thinking, Wendy, this should have been like a 3-month weekly class.
I know.
And even then, it wouldn't be.
We could talk all day long about this. I think our listeners probably, I'm looking at the questions and comments again. Thank you. They're so thoughtful. And I'd really like to find a way to answer those questions. So.
Well, someone wrote me, and I've gotten so many emails from people, and it's so great to get feedback. And this was even before the class. You're always welcome to email either of us with feedback. But someone said, this is pioneering. And someone else said, I'm so desperate for this. There's nothing like it. So I do hope that we can take this further at some point, that people will tell their friends, and that we can really help change the conversation. I'm timid to do this, but I'm gonna take a little risk here. In our political conversation right now, can I go here for a second? Kind of.
Sure.
The word narcissism has come up. This is, for those of you watching this sometime down the road, we don't know the outcome yet of our election. But we know that this topic has come up, and in many respects that it just feels like this is a time for us to raise our awareness collectively about the impact on our children, on ourselves, how it is that we've gotten into these relationships, what keeps us there, and most importantly, how we can approach those who are narcissistic in ways that are not likely to inflame and engage them, which is not an intuitive thing to do. We want to stand up for ourselves. So any final thoughts or words before we close out for today? You can feel free to look at some of these quotes. There's just so many.
There's so many good questions. The one question that I guess we didn't answer that might be important is, well, there's two. How do we tell our children about, the marriage coming to an end or the separation of the parents? And what do we do when our children start mimicking the narcissistic parent, using those behaviors?
The first one I think we can leave for now, because I have a thing on my website. It's a whole series on co-parenting. Touch on that. I want to stick to the narcissism. And then there's one I marked for you as well. Can you give an example of how to talk to kids when they tell you something their dad does or says that makes them unhappy? We have to be careful not to. We want our kids to offload to us, but we don't want it to get them into trouble.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that, again, this repair kit, that the non-narcissistic parent has to carry, it can be a bit tedious, but so necessary, so important. The repair work that you're doing is invaluable to helping your child to thrive amid this difficult environment. So when they come home and say there's something they did that made dad unhappy and they feel guilty and ashamed of that, we're restoring them back to their sense of, being fine, that they're fine as they are, and that, it's so sweet of you to care so much. You're such a good little boy or a good little girl that you care so much about your dad's feelings. But your dad's he's a grown-up, or your mom, she's a grown-up if it's a narcissistic mom. He's a grown-up, and he's really responsible for his feelings. And you may have done something that was upsetting, but we all do things that can be upsetting sometimes. And if you're sorry for that and you said you were sorry, then you did all that you need to do. And there's nothing else that you need to do more than that.
But let's also touch on if they're not coming home because so that's one, and I'm really glad that you covered that one. The other might be daddy screamed at me, or daddy shut me in my room for 2 hours because I wouldn't eat the dinner he made. And this is a very delicate situation, because if we then call dad and say, I heard you locked Johnny in his room because he wouldn't eat your dinner, Johnny ends up paying for that. It's a similar scenario to dealing with a schoolyard bully. Kids are panicked. Please don't call the school that these kids were chasing me all over the playground, because they'll just chase me and hit me tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. And we teach, what I've done with children or with parents and children together on this subject is we have to empower the children to be able to, unless they're so tiny that they really can't, and they really do need us to step in and to provide that kind of maybe even legal intervention if it's becoming too harsh. But to empower the kids to be able to say, I don't like it when you do that. It frightens me.
Yes.
I'm afraid. I'm uncomfortable. I'm upset. It hurts my feelings. I know you don't mean it, Daddy, but it's upsetting for me when you do that to me. So we empower them. We teach them. They can even record it if they're afraid. I had a child who was very afraid of saying this out out loud, but was willing to record his little voice, into a message and to send it off to his dad, to listen to, or have the mom step up with him when they go to do the exchange. And he says this while she's present, and then the parents can talk about it later. So it's not like, secret telling on the outside and mom just coming back and bashing the narcissistic father.
Although then we have to be careful about the shaming thing, because the narcissist is so vulnerable to feeling shame. I loved what you said before. They either feel that they're the most amazing thing in the world, or that they're nothing.
Yep.
So in the presence of you, or even grandma, or somebody who's helping with the transition, that shame may backfire, right?
Yeah, it can. It really can. And that's why, having that preparedness, and I think when we get into this next week and we talk about empathic confrontation, you'll see how many different ways we can say this that allow the narcissist to actually hear it in the way it's intended, right? So to take the intention and to share it.
I love that. And you guys, really, this is such a great book, Disarming the Narcissist. I highly recommend it. And you might even want to read that. Somebody already said, should we have a monthly membership for co-parenting with a narcissist? So, we're open for your feedback, and we'd love to hear what you've learned today. You can put it in the chat box, or you can email either of us. And any final thoughts, Wendy, before we wrap up today?
I was going to say the same. Please feel free to send an email with, if you have a burning question that just we haven't had a chance to answer fully. And if you're tuning in next week, you may get some of those answers as well. But don't hesitate to send an email off.
What email address do you give out?
I use wendy.behary@gmail.com.
Okay. All right. And I'm passionateparent@gmail.com. And of course, at least, and we should tell them or maybe you can put your Facebook page in the chat box. Let me find mine. Or Amy, are you there? Can you put my Facebook link? I know, Wendy, you have a couple.
I do.
Whichever one you want people to follow, because I'm thinking I may try and do just a very short Facebook Live on my author page this afternoon. Or in the next few days, just to kind of see how you're all doing. And again, please be kind to yourselves this week. This is just a lot of information. Relieve yourself of an expectation that suddenly this afternoon, when you see your ex-husband or former wife, you're going to just be, they're going to, rainbows and flowers. Right?
Right. We have to manage our expectations with this population for sure.
Yes.
I just put my website up there. It has all the links.
All right. So you guys, such a treat to get to know some of you here on the chat. I know many of you will be watching this as a replay, and that's why we're going to, we'll keep the enrollment open, because it's hard for parents to show up live. We could never really find a time, can we?
That's for sure.
And Wendy, I'm so grateful to you for taking time. I know how busy you are, and this is you're just a fountain of wisdom on this topic, and making a real contribution in the world for those many, many people who are really suffering because of this disorder.
Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate that, as I do your work as well, and feel so lucky to have met you and to have had the chance to share this opportunity, this discussion with you. It's wonderful. And thanks to all of you who are still writing. Your thank yous are so sweet of you, and your thoughtful comments.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, to Amy, my wonderful assistant, for going above and beyond to make this all work and grease the wheels. Thank you, Amy. All right, till next week then, we'll, unless we see you on Facebook Live, we'll sign off for now.
See you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Susan.
Bye, Wendy.